Good evening, everybody. My name is Omari Salisbury with ConvergeMedia. Want to thank you for joining us now for our second edition of Community Voices. And this edition, we're putting a focus on, mental health and basically in protest trauma. There's a lot of different words for it, everything else. But what we have seen, like over the last 40 some odd days, is that no matter if you take a cross section of people, whether you're a protester, whether you're a member of the media, whether you just lived in a building, whether you're a medic, whether you're a bystander, that a lot of people are definitely carrying away more things than they came with. The protest has impacted people in all kinds of different ways. And we have the platform here to kind of be able to look deeper at things where maybe some other platforms and channels can't do that. And so this was something that was definitely emerging. And then, after the events of this weekend, even with myself, so many people were like, yo, you got to talk to somebody, you got to do this and that and everything else. And this was kind of on the radar for us, but we really moved it up and expedited it to get on to air tonight. And so I want to welcome our guest right here. We got a few guests, but I want to welcome our expert, Ashley Mcgirt, MSW, social worker. I think last time I interviewed you or had you on, we were over at Black Dot, and I was like, yeah, it's my favorite therapist. So, Ashley, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, first, I really want to thank you and thank Converge for having this conversation and especially highlighting mental health in the community. It's really important and necessary. So, as you mentioned, I'm a licensed mental health therapist. I specialize in racial trauma. I'm also the CEO and founder of the Washington Therapy Fund Foundation, which was really started out of the need for individuals, specifically Black people in the community, to get free therapy, especially now during this time as many of us are grieving from COVID and just experiencing vicarious trauma, racial trauma, protest trauma, just trauma. And many of us don't have the funds to pay for therapists. So I wanted to bring something to the community that we all could have free of charge at no cost. And the community has really stepped up. And so far we've raised over $60,000 to provide free therapy to Black people throughout Washington State. So again, thank you for having me here and having this conversation.
What's crazy before we get started here is that I forgot all about, like, the last time you were on here, it was about COVID, and it was like keeping your mental health straight with COVID. And then it's like, it kind of went to the back of my head. There's some people who are dealing with COVID and now dealing with protest and who knows what else, huh?
Right. So it's just a whole host of problems. And none of this is new for most Black people. The protests, the racism, oppressive systems, all of these things are things that we've experienced as Black people and as a community, but now it's exacerbated that the media is showcasing it, which I love all the things that you are doing and that the media is really shedding light to these issues, but it's nothing new. But the thing that's new is with COVID, a lot of our normal coping skills aren't available. Gyms are closed. A lot of the people who we normally would go to, who were our support system, they're grieving too. So we can't call them up because they're experiencing stressors from COVID or just the things that they're seeing on TV and our bodies. So a lot of us have high levels of emotional resilience, but we're starting to see our bodies are shutting down. Some of us are sleeping too much. Some of us are not sleeping at all, not taking time, getting those breaks, especially since many of us are working from home. And now our home has been integrated with work life, and we're not able to get the peace that we once had at home, or the peace that we had at school or work is no longer available, and now we're in a dysfunctional home environment 24/7. So it's just a whole host of things that many of us are experiencing on top of 40 million people being unemployed. So it's causing a lot of stress on top of all of the trauma that we're seeing, either firsthand, directly. I've seen a lot of trauma just watching your feed. I've seen trauma firsthand when I came down to CHOP for the very first time, and I witnessed a fight, a man pull out a stun gun. So many things that I've seen firsthand and that I've seen through the media that are adding different levels and things that my clients are seeing, my brothers, my sisters, all of you in this room. And it takes a toll on our mental health, and each and every one of us has mental health. So I really want to have this conversation and shed light on some of the resources, some of the things that are available to the community.
Right, good stuff. So in this first segment here, we have Tarika, right? I see I got it right. And Joey. And so Tarika is a protester, and Joey, live streamer, amongst other things, also part of the protest. But for in this capacity, because you were out there with me, you've been out there with me every day live streaming. So in this capacity here, talking to you, more of a live streamer. I want to start with you first, Tarika. And you were a protester, but also somebody who experienced PTSD prior. Can you share with us and share with Ashley, like some of what your experience was, what you saw out here during the protest, and how it might have impacted you?
Yeah, thanks, Omari. I am a person who has been participating in Black Lives Matter protests for the last 5 years. And the protests that we've had in Seattle since George Floyd was killed was the first time that I participated in a protest that caused, that triggered my PTSD. I was diagnosed with PTSD about 15 years ago. And so in my daily life, I have to manage having PTSD. I have to do things like getting sufficient sleep. I have to do things like I'm very sensitive to sound. Some days it's worse than others. So a lot of times I wear things in my ears that cancel noise. A lot of times I wear earplugs just on regular days. And so when I went to the first protest that happened here in Seattle at Westlake, we were standing in a group and we were just chanting. And just out of nowhere, police started shooting flashbangs into that crowd that I was in. And with kind of no warning, no asking you to move back. And so for someone with PTSD, that was extraordinarily startling. And I kind of just like physically froze and like couldn't move from where I was. And so the police response to me not moving was to shoot some more flashbangs. And it really took a person to come and grab me and like move me out of the way of where I was and kind of stay with me until I was kind of basically acting normally again so that I could continue moving, because they continue shooting flashbangs and tear gas and things of that nature. And so my experience after that was being unable to sleep for a couple of days, having very high anxiety, noise sensitivity. I live nearby where the protest sprang out on Capitol Hill a couple of days later, so that meant there was constantly airplanes flying overhead, and that was another degree of noise. So basically anytime I was home, I had to keep my windows closed at all times, background noises, and sometimes wearing like sound canceling things at home because my anxiety had been triggered to such a degree. And so I was having a hard time continuing to engage in the protest, even though I wanted to continue to engage in the protest. And so I really had to, I really felt that I had to come down to Capitol Hill, even though I was still struggling with those things. But there were some days where I would be in and out to try to take care of myself and not expose myself to too many triggers. And so the way that I participated in the protest was basically I was in and out of the zone a lot and sort of trying to manage. And because I have been managing a life with PTSD for 15 years, I know a lot of tools to deal with traumatic responses. And so in addition to trying to take care of myself, one of the things I've been trying to do is to educate other people about what a trauma response is, how you can have a trauma response when you watch a video of another Black person being murdered. There's a lot of, and talking about the emerging research on racial trauma and what it is doing to people in the Black community to continue to be exposed to these sorts of images. Helping people to understand symptoms that they are having, like sleeplessness, somatic physical symptoms, and how they manage them. And it's an interesting thing because mental health is something that we have to do a lot of work in the African American community to increase awareness and to increase people's comfort with speaking about it. Even as someone myself who has had PTSD for 15 years, I never talked to other people about it until very recently. If you didn't know, you didn't know. And so I had to overcome a lot of issues of shame and feeling like people would be judgmental. A lot of people don't understand what PTSD is. You tell them you have PTSD, they're like, they freak out. They don't know how to interact with you. And so it's a thing that, I have had to sort of mitigate. How do I want to talk about it, and how do I want to make people aware of it? And it was really only earlier this year where I had decided it's something that I want to be public about in my life, and I was trying to figure out what was going to be the channel for me to do that. And then I got involved in these protests, and before I knew it, I was talking publicly about it to hundreds of people down here at CHOP because of the way my PTSD had been triggered at Westlake.
Right. Is one thing that Tarika said that caught my ear. She was like, people can catch trauma watching TV or watching videos and things like that. How, in your opinion, how traumatizing was it for people to watch that George Floyd video?
I think it was very traumatizing to watch a police officer have his knee on the neck of a black man for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That's extremely traumatizing. He looked like my cousin, like my brother. So as a black person, I can see so many of my family members. And as a non-black person, you should be able to see the basic humanity of George Floyd, which is why I believe that George Floyd has sparked one of the largest protests in this country that we have seen to date so far, from what I'm hearing, all across the globe, because we were able to see the humanity of George. And unfortunately, not a lot of people seen the humanity in Trayvon Martin and Sandra Bland and all of these other names, because it didn't spark the level of outrage that we seen when we witnessed George Floyd with a knee to his neck for 8 minutes. And so what we experience is called vicarious trauma, or it's also known as secondary trauma. So it's where you weren't actually there directly, but you watched a video of it, or you heard about it, and it caused a traumatic response to you. And we were talking a lot about trauma and PTSD, but it's also important to really name these things, because like you said, Tarika, not a lot of people know what PTSD is, or we have the misconception that PTSD is the things that, soldiers get. And so only people who served in Vietnam or, Korea or all of these other things are the only people who get PTSD. But that's not true. Trauma is really anything that overwhelms the system, and each type of trauma is different. So for many of us, some of us in this room, if we hear a flashbang, it may cause a traumatic reaction. To other people, it might not bother you at all. And to some of us, even if you were exposed to all these flashbangs, you may become so desensitized to where it's not even traumatic to you. So there's different levels of traumatic. And just because it's traumatic to one person, but not to me, doesn't mean that it's not trauma. And then PTSD is really a maladaptive form of trauma, a type of trauma response. And then we have racial trauma, which is different because it's continuous. So it's continuous race-based stress, whereas typically a traumatic event is singular, maybe one flashbang going off or just one incident that you've seen, the George Floyd, that was one particular time that we've seen. Whereas with race-based trauma, it's an occurrence of all these different things that are happening to Black people, people of color, indigenous people that we're exposed to on a daily basis. And it takes a huge toll on our psyche. And really just impacts, like you said, your sleep, fear, hypervigilance, all of these different things. And I think it was important to note how you said the individuals took you to the side when you were acting normally, but you were acting normal to begin with, because that's a normal response to trauma. I would be concerned if you didn't have any type of traumatic response. And that's what happens when we're exposed to ongoing traumas, when we become desensitized to things.
You and my therapist are always telling me to stop saying the word normal.
Yeah, that normal, I really don't like that word. And when we look at the field of mental health, especially since we're talking about racism, mental health, the field of psychiatry, social work, which I have my degree in, and psychology, is really a racist and oppressive system, because they based normal behaviors on white people. I mean, Sigmund Freud, the founding father of psychiatry, studied white Jewish women. And I'm not white, I'm not Jewish, yet I have to take Sigmund Freud's principles and apply them to people who look like me, because the majority of my clients who I serve are Black people. And I also have to look at Carl Jung, who was extremely racist and said that Black people were inferior to whites. I mean, the whole field of psychology is embedded in racism, including the APA, the American Psychological association who doesn't have any black members on one of its highest boards. So we have to take a look at the field and how black therapists such as myself really have to get creative and unique, because I still have to follow the state of Washington, which I'm licensed in, to really make sure that I'm following these guidelines and principles. I mean, you know, the APA just recognized racial trauma a couple years ago. And this isn't anything new that's been happening to us. And the vicarious trauma impacts everyone, white, black, Asian, however you identify, just being exposed.
Right. I think, so for me, two things. That during the live stream, well, one thing, and then I got a question for Joy. During the live stream, we'd end a lot of nights over at the memorial wall and the candlelight vigil. And I would just like remind the viewers that literally thousands of people came through when this was Chaz and Chop, and they weren't really what you would call protesters. They weren't people political agenda, you know, whatever with Durkin or Chief Best or anything, and they just came to that wall because people felt a loss, and they wanted to be around other people that felt that same loss that they did, you know, and it was crazy. And I think that it's for another show, but I think that was one of the things that was really lost when people talk about Chaz and Chop, and even before that, when the Western Barricade was still there, that so many people would come, usually during the day, before it got funky, and you know, they would come, and when you talk to them, and I never talked to those people, those are the special moments, so we would film, but I never interview people on camera. When you talk to them over there, they were just like, man, I felt some kind of way, and I just wanted to come here and light a candle or be around other people. So the vicarious trauma that you're talking about, like we saw, and that memorial wall and candlelight vigil are actually still there, and people still come. She said something, or Ashley said something me and you could both relate to. She said flash bang. And so, you know, Joey was a live streamer, still a live streamer, although it's not as active as it was. And I mean, as somebody, me and you are out there every night, right? Every night, the Western Barricade, 100%. That whole week, you know, and so that was tear gas and pepper spray on Monday. That was tear gas, pepper spray, and rubber bullets on Tuesday. Then you had a few days of, like, you know, peace or just tension on the line. You know what I'm saying? Where it was like any moment it could go either way. And then you had that Friday, Saturday, and then the showdown on Sunday, where they call it, you know, the battle for 11th or whatever martial law calls that last night. How did that being out there, like, one, because like you intentionally put yourself in danger because you were streaming and you knew like what could happen out there, but still, how did all that impact you?
Yeah, well, that's the big joke, right? Is that white people run towards danger, right, rather than away from it. So I would say I don't think I realized that it was impacting me as much as it was until maybe a week later, because like you said, we were out here every day with, you know, some nights upwards of, you know, 300 plus of those blast balls. And the scary thing is you don't know if it's going to be the tear gas one when it's ignited and it just releases a lot of smoke, or if it's the one that's going to, you know, land on your foot that's going to blow up. And I had both land on me at different times, so you don't know whether to run or to pick it up and toss it back, right? So just having that uncertainty be in our faces, ever present all the time for a sustained period of time, upwards of, what was it, a week and a half, 2 weeks, it definitely took a toll. And one of the ways in which that really revealed itself to me was through my sleep or lack thereof, because what I saw myself having to deal with, even when I would go home after, you know, the crazy nights out here, was, excuse me, I don't mean to use the word crazy. I'm trying to remove ableist language from my everyday. So I would rather say exhilarating or threatening or scary. But anyway, I would go to home and try to go to bed, and I couldn't fall asleep. Or I would get to sleep, and then I would have dreams. I know the first one was about an active shooter situation. It was that night that I was out here. I was interviewing Councilmember Shama Sawant, asking her about, you know, what she thought of the situation, and next thing you know, I'm getting messages and messages and messages about how there was somebody just tried to shoot one of the protesters. That's when that car came barreling in, And so that's actually only maybe one of 3, I think, active shooter dreams that I've had. I had one actually last night. And so waking up with night sweats. 4th of July was particularly difficult because everywhere around us, it boom, boom, boom. And for those of you who maybe weren't on the ground, one of the things that we were hearing was that fireworks were used as a deterrent potentially to perhaps distract from a shooting that might be happening somewhere else right around us. So to make kind of throw us off so we don't know where it actually came from. So I hear fireworks and I automatically associate it with gunfire, not just because it sounds like gunfire, but because quite literally it was used in tandem to sort of avoid suspicion or what have you. So it's been a really interesting adjustment. I will admit I had a lot of privilege for the last 28 years when it came to 4th of July. I don't have any family that's in the military. I don't know anyone personally that suffers from PTSD that's very vocal with me about it. So as far as I was concerned, it didn't really exist. But this 4th of July was very different, and I now understand.
Well, you know, the night, because it was Juneteenth, the night that Lorenzo Anderson was murdered, remember, that was a call because we kept calling it on Twitter. We were like, man, firework, 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 until it got late into the evening. And then, you know what I'm saying, even when that shooting occurred, a lot of people, except for the people who were there, thought those were fireworks. So I just in a factual sense, not even in a therapeutic sense or something, but in a factual sense, fireworks were going off that whole night, and people dismissed everything to fireworks just to come to find out that Lorenzo Anderson had been shot.
And another thing that I noticed, like you were saying on the 4th of July was a different experience for you. I noticed on social media, a lot of people being upset with the fireworks that were going on and saying, you know, we just experienced this, had this experience with the police where we were attacked in these ways. How dare people be shooting off fireworks? And usually on the 4th of July, I see some people posting things like, hey, please be aware of fireworks and the impact that it has on people who have served in the military. But this year I've seen a lot of people posting, this is having this impact on me. And so I think that there are a lot of people trying to probably understand what they're experiencing. And I see a lot of people, most likely incorrectly, self-diagnosing themselves with PTSD. A lot of people don't understand that you have responses to trauma. There's a wide range of responses that people have when they have trauma. It's not necessarily a diagnosis of PTSD. And I think it's actually best if people not apply that diagnosis to themselves. It's not necessarily helpful for people who do have PTSD. But just because, you know, you don't have that diagnosis, it does not mean that what you're going through is not valid. It does not mean that what you're going through is not something that is causing you anxiety or depression or sleeplessness and that you need to take very seriously. And one of the things that that some of the members of Black Collective Voice wanted me to ask you is, how do you talk to people who you see are dealing with a traumatic response, who may not understand that they are or may not be understand the ways in which they need to take care of themselves right now? How do you talk to them about it?
So it depends who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to a client, then it's going to be on a therapeutic level. If I'm talking to family, oftentimes they're not going to receive the information from me, even though I am a licensed therapist. I'm still sister, auntie, cousin. I'm not therapist. So I try to just model things and share to them some of the coping skills, some of the techniques that I utilize in my own life and with my clients. So it's important to really share, because oftentimes it seems like, you know, you need to go to therapy, you need to do this, you need to do that. But if you say, hey, through therapy, I learned this, or this is something that I've done in my own life and it's helped me to process through this, I can sleep better, because I personally have experienced a lot of trauma in my life. And I'm a trauma therapist, so I help people get through their own traumas, and the things that I teach them, I also utilize. So, you know, I share how it worked in my life or the aha moments that my clients share. If it's someone who I'm trying to encourage to go to therapy, just kind of on the street, I do a lot of talks, have a lot of conversations like this about the importance of mental health in the community. Then I'll share a lot of resources, let people know, you know, it's okay not to be okay, and that there are culturally competent clinicians out there, because because I know a lot of times that's one of the biggest deterrents is for people not to go to therapy because they feel like there's not a therapist who they can relate to, and then cost, which is why I created the Washington Therapy Fund to help eliminate the cost. And then I also, share about community mental health agencies, things like that. So it really depends. Who are you talking to? Who are you hoping to have the conversation with? Is it your child? Sometimes, they don't always receive everything from a parent. So you need to bring in, someone else, even if it's their cousin or a friend, someone with a non-biased perspective. So I kind of channel my conversation depending upon who I'm talking to.
I've got, and we have to end this segment, but I have a quick question for you as well. Is that, everybody deals, I think, with things differently. And so, so like for me, coming into stuff knowing that it's work and knowing that I'm here, and it's just like I used to get but Joy was there, we get gassed together, but the next day I'm still at the line talking to the police, like I wake up every day like, hey, what's happening? And I used to get so much like feedback, like, oh man, you should feel this way, you should feel that way. And I don't know if I'm just compartmentalizing or who knows, but I think, is it fair to say that everybody deals with things, in their own way, and because somebody has saw something traumatic, that might not necessarily mean that trauma stays with them, or is that the case? You know what I'm saying? Because maybe it's just growing up in the CD and spending all this time overseas. I've seen a lot of stuff, especially when I was living over across Africa and everything else. And so I see stuff and it gets me in the moment, and then I'm just able to move on from it. Mm-hmm. But, I got a lot of people who are like, man, well, you need, and I talked to one of the therapists here the other day, because so many people on my Twitter were like, man, go talk to somebody. And then we put this show together here today as well. But does everybody deal with trauma differently? Absolutely. Each person deals with trauma differently. And your response is actually very common for what I hear for a lot of black men who have been exposed to trauma since they were yay high. So, you've been dealing with that since you were little, like you said, growing up in CD. So you've heard all different things. I don't know what you've seen firsthand. You mentioned Africa. But what I really look at when it comes to black men in general is, how is your body responding? How are you sleeping? Are you having any headaches? Because like Joey said, even as a white male in front of us, the body responds. So it really doesn't have anything to do with black-white, but our body responds to trauma. So we may not process it mentally, emotionally. More so, that's what I see for black men, but everybody, depending upon who you are, may have that response where you're like, okay, now I'm starting to have nightmares. You just described all of these things about a shooting that occurred, nightmares. What's happening? What is your body responding to? Are you more fatigued? Is your neck hurting? So with my clients, I actually do a head to toe assessment where you actually tune in with your head. Am I having any migraines? Is my head sweaty? Like, what's feeling with my head? How is my neck? All the way down to the soles of your feet. And then I do like lots of different grounding exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, because, we're resilient people and this is work for you. Like you said, you still had to come and continue to do your reporting. This is work. Yeah, I couldn't wear it on my sleeve. You know what I'm saying? Like, for sure. It's like, okay, it's a new day. Let's go.
Yeah, you're not going to showcase. You're not going to be crying. Even me as a hospice therapist, sometimes people are like, oh, that's so sad. How do you deal with dying people? How do you deal with trauma in general? But I utilize the tools to help myself process. It's not that I'm so desensitized to death or trauma, but I have the tools and the skills, and I check in with my body each day. And there was a time period when all of this happened and I was sleeping like consistently, and I'm like, okay, I need to take a break. So that's why you need to check in with your body. How's my body feeling? And ask those questions daily, especially when you're exposing yourself to trauma, or if you're in a work where you're exposed to daily trauma. It's important to really, have those check-ins with yourself and talk to somebody. Even if it's not a therapist, there are healers in our community. Indigenous people have healed since before therapy was a thing. So tap into that, whether it's Reiki, like whatever it is. I just want to see the community heal.
Right.
Yeah. And just like people deal with trauma, experience trauma differently, treatments can be different for the trauma that you have. So it doesn't have to be talk therapy. Sometimes it can be body work, like you said, Reiki, massage, all of that is healing work.
Right.
I'm a holistic therapist, so I support it all, because I know there's not just one way to healing. And also when we look at the way people healed at the beginning of time. They were doing talk therapy in different ways, but there's different ways that our people have healed. So that's why I really love looking at like Native American traditions and African traditions. I incorporate a lot of African-centered healing into my work because these people were healing, for centuries, for years. So just find ways to heal your body.
Right. All right. Well, Tarika, Joey, man, thank you. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like I said, the idea for today is for to start a conversation. It isn't for us to have for a deep dive into therapy, but to start letting people know. So thank you.
I just want to piggyback off what Tarika said, because this isn't therapy. This wasn't a therapy session, if you are hearing any of these things and you feel like you have PTSD, please don't diagnose yourself. Have a culturally competent clinician do that for you.
Okay, culturally competent clinician. All three there. We're gonna take a short break right now. Who we got next, Nikki? We put too much pressure on the producer. All right, we're gonna take a break. When we come back, we got our next set of guests. You're watching Community Voices, Mental Health Edition. All right, welcome back to Community Voices Mental Health Edition. I'm your host, Omari Salisbury. Just wanted to address something real quick because I'm always looking at my phone when we're on set. I'm looking for comments and everything else. And the producer told me that she's moderating comments over there. So thank you, Nikki. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not like, looking at some other Facebook or something like that. Just trying to see because this is always a very proactive audience that we have here. So welcoming back our guest. Well, we have lots of guests here, but welcoming back Ashley Mcgirt, MSW. The social worker holding it down.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, and so on our second segment here, we have Tharp and Danielle, who are medics, but you know what I'm saying, and when we go back to CHOP, and then we have Robert, who's a resident of 12th Avenue Arts. You guys might know Robert from, his videos that have gone around the world when he would come out of 12th Avenue Arts. Tired of you CHOP guys, and they put barricades in the street. He would like one man army, man, and just go and throw all. He was like, I'm tired of you choppers, man. And every single, so the protesters would be like, every day. And Robert would be like, I'm gonna move your stuff every day. You know what I'm saying? So matter of fact, man, let's start with you, Robert. Because you're you'll tell us best, but you live there in 12th Avenue, which is literally right across the street, right across from the East Precinct, and it was inside the Chaz, and basically for all intents and purposes it was inside the CHOP because the further down 12th Avenue was barricaded, right. So your building was barricaded. But the longer story on that is you were barricaded for 8 days with the Seattle police. Right. And so a lot of people forget about that. People who live on Capitol Hill, they were barricaded for 8 days with the Seattle police, 2 weeks with CHOP, and then for a few days with SPD again. But man, the day that I met you was I walked up because I heard this yelling like, God, I'm tired of you guys, man. You guys, and you brought up a lot of valid points. One, you brought up like, man, would this be happening if it was the CD or the South End and things like that? But I think we'll bring you back for another show for that because that was an important perspective. Would all these same people feel comfortable sitting on Othello or on Rainier or on MLK or 23rd? You know what I'm saying? But because it's here, But you talked about in your building, you said that there was people who were disabled and things like that. Talk about what it was like first being in that building and the obstacles that you faced even when the SPD had control of the area and then the CHOP.
I started briefly when SPD had control. When you seen the barricades when they was National Guard, they was deep all around the block. So we was adjusting to that. So and then I believe June 8th, that's when everybody was surprised. The CHOP protesters were surprised that SPD left. All the residents were surprised that everybody left. And nobody knew what to do because they left early in the morning. So then by nightfall, it had come over deals like, okay, cool. This is how we're going to go about this. We got to arm ourselves, this and this and that. And it was alarming to see it transition so quickly. And nobody knew what to do and how to diffuse the situation, figure the situation out. And you just have to adapt to some things quicker than others. So it was rough.
So when we talked that day, you were just like, man, I'm fed up. You're like, man, I'm fed up, and it was everybody was trying to stop you. You was bad. You was just like, you was giving them the old school Marshawn, just the forearm shiver, like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, get off me. I mean, and you move, and the thing is like clearly we could see that the street wasn't gonna open, but it seemed like that was just you every day sending a message like, nah, man, I'm not gonna let your stuff be here.
Yes, and I was just making a statement like, this street is not. We're not giving up this street.
You, as in you, the residents, weren't giving up the street to CHOP.
Me, the resident, wasn't giving up the street to CHOP because we live here. We pay taxes, all this. And the protests, we're all for the protests. Nobody was against the protests. We was against what went on after hours when the news cameras stopped recording. I believe you was the only ones that was brave enough. Salute to you. So seeing that, and that was my frustration. So every time the media and the world will see me erupt, it was my frustration the day after. And anybody will be frustrated when you see young kids being killed or shootings happen that there's just no need for. And so anybody will be fed up after 2-3 weeks, after you don't know what's going on or what's going to happen day in and day out. You'll be exhausted. So coming home from work or from wherever and just to be harassed just to get in your building, and it's crazy. And these kids are armed. You don't know if they're going to shoot. You don't know what they're going to do. So it's like, at what point, who's going to step in? Because you see SPD, they didn't step in. They wasn't responding. It's been a few residents that called 911 several days in a row, and they had said, like, we're not responding. Could you meet us outside of the CHOP boundaries and stuff? And at what point do you say, hey, enough is enough? So every time people will see me erupt, it was just like anybody would be like, hey, enough is enough. And so every day they was like, hey, like you said, they would chant, hey, we're here, we're here, we're there. And I'm like, still standing here.
You come out there with your everyday as well. So Ashley, like I said, he went through 2 different barricades. He went being barricaded by the police, by SPD, then barricaded by the Chaz and CHOP. And he said he reached a level to where he was just like, enough's enough. And like I said, further down the street there was like, further barricades. So like him moving the stuff wasn't gonna open the street, but him moving the stuff was like, yo man, it's not okay with me that you guys are blocking.
And go ahead. I'm sorry. No. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What's the question?
Well, no, I mean, it's like, I mean, the way that he expressed himself.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If you could speak to that, if at all.
And I mean, each person has a different type of response. I don't know how many people were out there helping you, but like he said, he's a resident.
Just me.
Just you?
Yeah, it was just him and like
you,
50,
solo.
100 choppers.
Okay. Yeah. So each, when you're fed up, you never know how your body's gonna respond. I love the quote. I'm not a killer, but don't push me. So you never know to what level you're going to get to a point and actually respond, especially when this is your home and you're looking out and you see the reality. The majority of the people who are out, who are doing this, when they don't look like you, they don't look like the people who this is meant to be about. So there's different levels. And so I would have to have more of a thorough conversation to really understand what was going on, what your history was, what led to that point for you to actually be out there every single day by yourself, while the protesters are also out there every day. Because, I definitely support the protesters. I support the cause. I don't know how I would react if that was my home. But I also, go back to our history.
Well, I remember Robert brought up that, he was like in the building. There was several homebound or disabled people, and like one of the days we talked several days over 2 weeks. And one of the days we talked about wasn't even his frustration. It was the fact that, like, man, somebody has to come in and have someone bathe them and things like that. And people who were providing services to homebound people in the building couldn't get in the building. Was that correct?
Yes.
Right.
And the thing about it, like before I started, people started seeing me voice my opinion amongst the CHOP.
Yeah.
I seen these individuals, my residents, come in or rushing in from the building. They heard that this is after SPD had already retreated, and this is the CHOP security just harassing them, asking them, hey, do you live here? And this one individual lady, she's a single mom, I believe, and she had 2 kids, but she was on the elevator with me, and she started breaking down crying because her little kid asked her, Mom, why did that man with a gun ask us, do we live here? That right there touches my heart. I was in the military. I'm diagnosed with PTSD.
Oh, wow.
And to see something like that, it's really hurtful, because nobody should be put through that torment in America. Like I said, you've been overseas, right? So to see that in America go on, nobody should be put through that. If anybody, mother, grandparents, lived in a type of neighborhood where this CHOP thing just happened, anybody will be highway straight there going, hey, you're not stopping my mom from any of this going on. So that was my frustration was from. People may say, hey, that was an angry black man. No, my frustrations was from those residents that couldn't stand up for themselves. And being diagnosed with PTSD, I'm a loner. I enjoy being by myself because I can't control the flashbangs, the booms. I done been to Iraq. I done seen it all. So to see it in my backyard and to see people continue to indulge in this, it's frightening, because that's not what America is about. America is about, we can agree to disagree, to understand that, hey, we can find some common ground, that we both have knowledge on both sides, that we may not be right, I may not be right, but understand that we can agree to disagree. But not, hey, if I don't agree with you, I'm gonna shoot you. That's not fair.
Yeah, man, after my own heart. I think that people hear me on the stream all the time, and even on the morning show, I tell people that, like, man, we don't have to agree, but let's make a commitment to understand. You know what I'm saying?
That's all.
And we can understand each other's point of view. It's dope.
That's it.
And since we're free to disagree, I will say that seems to be the America that I know, where, you know, you are asked, is this your home? They may not always have a gun, but as a homeowner, I'm constantly asked, do I own my home? All the time. The car that I'm driving, is it mine? And, you know, I live in Kent. I'm not even in Bellevue or like any type of real neighborhood like that. But this is the reality of what many of us are experiencing. And that's why the protest occurred. It did go a little to the left. You know, it may not necessarily have been as long as it was, or the way that it was, if it was in a black community or if it was predominantly black. All we have to go on is what if. And, you know, in therapy, I always say that's destructive thinking, when you start going down what if, shoulda, coulda, woulda, because we don't necessarily know. But, you know, that's normal for so many people, so many of us. And there's a lot of sacrifices that need to be made in protest. And it's unfortunate that that was your neighborhood. But I mean, there were disabled people during the boycotts. There were people who couldn't walk and were disabled, and for the cause they sacrificed, and they chose not to ride those buses. They chose to walk until the soles of their feet bled, because they wanted to be down for the cause, and they wanted to sacrifice so that we could sit anywhere we want on the bus. So there's different types of sacrifices, and it's normal to be angry, because I would be mad if I was, you know, walking too, but I'm gonna be out there and I would walk till the soles of my feet bled. I say this now, but I wasn't alive then, so I don't necessarily know what my mindset would be. I would like to think I would be one of the ones out there walking, but, you know, there's sacrifices that need to be made in order for us to get the justice that we need.
Well, this particular building right here, and they put out a letter. Jamie put out a letter about a week in the chop, because one of their biggest complaints, to be honest with you, 90% of the letter, and it's on my Twitter somewhere, people could go through it from a few weeks ago, 90% of their complaints at the time was actually SPD. They were like, man, tear gas came through the windows, flashbangs kept us up at night, and everything else. And then they were telling Chop, like, look, man, basically don't repeat the same things. Turn down your music, control your people. Because 12th Avenue Arch, where Robert's saying, they literally had National Guard up and down in front of the building. There was police, National Guard, state police, SWAT vehicles. All this stuff was in front of their building. And then when, like, the gas is indiscriminate. When it comes out, that tear gas goes everywhere. So these guys, not only, you know, they went through their thing with Chop, which you can see, at least with Chop, you went out there and you were like moving their stuff. I bet you wasn't out there with them National Guardsmen, was you?
I'm a smart man.
Hey, when that gas came out, you wasn't out there trying to move the gas and everything.
I'm a smart man. I'm definitely a smart man and stuff.
The most unfortunate part, though, is that I bet you, since we're talking about bets, I bet there was no mental health services offered to any of the people in that building. Has anybody reached out to you?
And no, and see, I don't know about the rest of the buildings around the neighborhood and stuff, but mine's in particular, our building houses the SPD personal vehicles and the bomb squad and all their equipment.
Yeah,
so
got
that's
a tunnel underneath there.
That's the only reason that our building put out a statement and stuff, because our building was really prominent. Like, okay, then because some of the Chop personnel, they tried to target the building. It's like, yo, you guys, I get your message, but it's like, what point are you at? What sacrifices you getting at? Because at nighttime, this is not protesting. What are you guys doing? You guys doing it in the daytime? I love it. You know, let's keep doing it. But at nighttime, that was the frustration. That was all the concerns. That's all the fears come from. You know.
Right. Want to move it over here to Tharp and Danielle, and you know, it's a unique position, and I'll be honest with you, these guys, they had a special place kind of in my heart, so to speak, because it's the medics, and the medics were indiscriminate. You know what I'm saying? Like, you see even Robert shaking his head, but it didn't matter who you were. The medics were there to help. And so whether you were media, and there was a lot of media, especially when the Western Barricade was here, they got caught up in tear gas. You know what I'm saying? For local reporters, national reporters, and everything. It's a lot of media people. They got shot with rubber bullets and everything else. So, but it didn't really matter if you were, if you were white, black, if you were a protester, if you're me. And there was lots of people who were just lived in the neighborhood. We have lots of stories of people just going around the corner and then walking into tear gas. Didn't have anything to do with anybody. So I had to preface you guys properly, what I'm saying, and talking to the medics here. So we'll start with you, Tharp, and we'll move over to Danielle. What you guys witnessed the trauma, like you guys. I mean, some of you, I was at the press conference. There was the woman who got hit with the flashbang, and there was a lot of people. I got hit with quite a few. I had lots of shrapnel injuries to my leg. I mean, they weren't like enough to be going to the hospital from the flashbang shrapnel. People don't realize that once that grenade explodes, the metal goes everywhere, and so you see people with cuts right above their eyes and cuts to this and that. Can you talk about some of the injuries that you guys treated early on? What were some of the things you were seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, when I first came out, the only stuff I brought with me was eye wash kits. I had no real idea sort of the levels to which SPD was going to go to inflict terror on these people. I came out to wash pepper spray out of people's eyes, and within 3 or 4 days, I was treating fractured ribs, really severe respiratory distress. Someone I treated had been hit in the back of the head with one of the foam-tipped pepper bullets that sprayed paint all over their face, and their eyes, they couldn't open their eyes because of the paint. They couldn't breathe through their nose because there was paint in their nose. The ones where it seems like the weapon was being used incorrectly, intentionally, were sort of the hardest ones to treat, because it's someone going out of their way to harm someone very maliciously, and that was always the stuff that you had to take a second afterwards and breathe to yourself when you were done with that patient. I don't know, was that any different for you?
Yeah, I would say the most severe injury that I treated was Aubriana, who got hit in the chest with the flashbang, and then shortly after went into cardiac arrest several times. And that was from a flashbang from SPD. And then also Dan Gregory, who took the bullet from the car that tried to rush the crowd in his shoulder that same day.
You guys treated that as well?
I did, yeah. So those two were probably the most severe things that I treated. And of course, that was from the person who was driving the car, not from the police. But everything else was lots of tear gas injuries, people in respiratory distress from the tear gas or the pepper bombs, being hit with flash grenades, like burns and welts on arms and legs, and luckily at the medic station that I worked at, we had mental health professionals available too. So a lot of like severe anxiety, panic mixed in with all of that. But I would say that those two are the most severe, and then everything else, just like Tharp was saying, being hit with that level of weaponry causing all kinds of different injuries.
How did I mean, it's one thing what you guys treated, but how did seeing all of that impact you? Like, what were you guys doing at the end of the day, or whatever? What was that conversations?
Do you want to take this, or me to start?
I think a lot of those days I was just drinking a lot of whiskey when I got home. That was one of the first ones, was a little bit of unhealthy self-coping. There was being a little more serious, there was a really high level of camaraderie that developed between the medics. I was staying with a friend of mine who lives not in the neighborhood but very nearby, who, he's got a long list of health issues, so he was never out here. And it was really hard going back there after some of those really bad nights and sitting down with people who just had no idea And like, I'd just been on the line and in the medic station for 18 hours, and now I'm going to go sit on the couch and talk about video games with my buddy. It's like, that was really hard. But between, myself and Danielle and a bunch of the other medics, they're very quickly developed this really strong level of camaraderie where, they were the only people who got it the same way I did, and we could sit down together and unwind in a way that you couldn't with anybody else.
Right, and so let me pose this question, actually, because I find myself kind of isolating from people who aren't paying attention to this, and then they'll hit me with like some kind of question like, well, how is everything going? And that's it, and it's difficult. So it's like everybody that I'm around, because I think it's just so much going on, and it's whatever, that there is a group of people in my life. Most people just hop on the stream though, but there is a group of people in my life who just don't follow, don't whatever, and it's good for them. I'm actually but I can't deal with them. But it's made all of us guys much closer. Bobby Steels, Eric Calligraphy, and Jake, kind of like how the medics are saying there. Is that something that's coming?
Yeah, that's extremely normal, especially with people who work in the healthcare industry. We see a lot of camaraderie where people, come together. I do hospice therapy, so not a lot of people understand what it's like to work with a dying person, but I could talk to my hospice colleagues who get it, my hospice nurses, other hospice social workers. So it's really important to find allies and find individuals who've been through what you've been through, who understand it, who you can have the conversation with. Because when you talk to somebody who doesn't know, then they're going to ask you unnecessary questions. You have to relive the experience, versus you two were there together. You don't have to explain to Danielle what happened because she's seen it. So it makes the conversation go a little bit smoother in terms of just having a conversation. So if you've experienced any type of trauma, or if you've been exposed to something, it's really important to find like a support group, or do some type of group therapy, hop into a virtual session, because I know there's still a lot of social distancing right now, but just finding people who know what it's like, who were there at the protest, who were down, hands-on and know, or either just had an eye. Maybe they were tapping into your feed. I was watching your feed every day because I couldn't get out there, but I knew that you were there daily, so I was able to see it and actually know what's going on.
You guys have also dealt with two, one, a lot of other things here, you know what I'm saying, shootings and assaults and ends of assaults, and even the other day, you guys, the fire department and Medic 1 responded, but you guys were down there, you know what I'm saying, on the freeway and everything else. How did those, how did those events, those are very major events, and we talk about, I'm not belittling these other things that happen to people, especially people who were maimed or something, and flashbang to the chest and everything else, but how did those other events, especially like the murder of Lorenzo Anderson, and then you had a second shooting there and the third shooting and everything else, and you guys were literally the first responders in a situation that you might not necessarily have been set up to be the first responder, you know what I'm saying? How did that impact you guys?
I think for me, my day job, I guess, I'm an ICU nurse, and so I do deal with super severe things. I've treated cardiac arrest a number of times. I treat gunshot wounds, all the time, but in those situations you're safe and you have a team that supports you, and so it's just, for me, it's been a completely different, I thought I had great coping skills, and I thought I knew how to work through stuff like that, and then this just really threw a curveball at me because it's just a bit out of my wheelhouse. But like Tharp was saying, the camaraderie that we've built, I've known, a month now? It feels like a decade, of friendship with these people. And I feel bad, like you were saying. I feel like I've neglected my other friends and family who aren't here and who are going on with normal life and aren't part of the protest, because I feel like I don't know how to relate right now. And those specific events, those really major events, those are what haunt you in your nightmares, and that's what you think about when you're just about to fall asleep, and then you replay that in your head and like, what could I have done better? And was that the question?
Yeah, no, it's just how it's impacted you guys, because it seems to me like the medics kind of got hit from all sides.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, one, you're treating people, and so you're seeing like these injuries come in, you know what I'm saying? And so there's the impact of that, but then also you're seeing some of these other things like these, like, man, gunshot wounds and everything else there, and all kinds of other crimes that didn't necessarily make it to, you know, the evening news and things like that. A lot of people came over and treated you guys, considering, you know, the space, this was a protest zone and everything else. Like, man, like, how did those major crimes, I guess you would say, like, impact you? Like me, it would be impossible for me to say, like, I think I'm okay, you know what I'm saying? But I can't sit here and say that, like, that night and all those things didn't impact me, you know what I'm saying? And so I'm just curious to you guys, is actual literally hands-on trying to save people's lives or trying to give, you know, aid to them?
Especially touching base on the violent crime aspect of it. It was put to me very interestingly by a friend of mine who, when CHOP first was set up, and then again after Lorenzo was murdered, so much of the source of this violence and this pain and the damage that's happening in this community is stuff that millions of dollars and decades has been spent on. And then we had this little ragtag crew of volunteer medics who are expected to do what decades and millions of dollars couldn't. And that feeling of being just so unbelievably out of my element and punching so far above my weight class was both disheartening and traumatizing, but was also somewhat empowering because of how much good we did do. And so it's what I keep telling myself is I can look back on the ones that didn't go perfectly and know that we did the best we could on the ones that did go well.
Yeah. You know, and I talked to Donita earlier today. You know what I'm saying? Actually, it's a whole nother issue with her and the mayor and some meeting and everything else. And, you know, initially, a lot of the anger of the loss of her son was pointed towards the medics. You know what I'm saying? It was like, man, the medics, man. And really, I'm gonna connect you guys. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna connect you guys and Donita. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, I think people realize now that you guys just did the best that you could with what you had, you know? So if you would allow me to do that, I would like to bring you guys together.
I will put you in touch with those medics. I was not personally there that night, but I can speak and say that I know that they did do the best that they could, and the fire department didn't respond. We had one of the medics on her hands and knees pleading with them to come, and they wouldn't come. And with the circumstances that were there, it's awful, but I know that they did their best. And I can't consent for them to be put in contact myself, but I will put them in contact with you.
I mean, we'll see how it goes. That's all I'm saying is, you know, it might be some kind of healing, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Around that.
I 100% agree.
Right. Any thoughts, Ashley, on what you're hearing over here?
No, definitely. I mean, everything that I'm hearing, it sounds a lot like things that I've heard before when it comes to trauma. And I know as medics, as healthcare professionals, we're all trained around this, but you never really know until you're there and you're in it and you're experiencing it. But definitely, I just advocate for talking to someone, whether it's going to therapy yourself, maybe finding a therapist who's trained in EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which it's a long fancy term. It's just a type of therapy that really helps you heal from trauma, and it's quick. I know a lot of us millennials, I'm a millennial therapist, we want something fast, and you know, I'm always telling people just time, but EMDR is one of the quicker therapeutic tools. It still takes some time and it still takes some work, and like you said, you know, got to find new coping skills, because the coping skills that worked for you in the ICU don't work for you now with the things that you experienced at the protest, because it was a real war zone. So now it's just, okay, what are some new things that I can do? Who can I reach out? Who are my allies? And not feeling bad for not being able to talk to your friends or your family members, because they should be able to support you and grant you the space during this time to give you what you need. But really, again, just checking in with yourself and finding ways to support yourself.
Right. And quickly, Robert, so the police came in, and like everybody in 12th Avenue Arch, you guys had like front row seat, literally. You know what I'm saying? So once again, 12th Avenue was sitting there with like, man, so many police and everything else, SWAT vehicle. The sweep didn't take long though. You know, the sweep out the chop only took like about 20 minutes. The police kept it barricaded for a few days. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And now all the streets are open. So tell me, like, how are you feeling now?
I feel like the initial chop movement is lost because of so much crime and stuff that happened during the whole segment of it, and I believe that it could have this could have resulted in something much more than it was if it had a sense of direction. I believe once the police left, nobody knew. It took everybody by surprise. And it's just like you're 17, 18 years old and your mom say, "Hey, I'm leaving you the house for the weekend." You're like, "Oh, you're surprised." So you just go and do whatever. And then it gets out of control. And that's what that was. But initially the movement was good. I seen this morning, I seen a couple of protesters. They were still going. And that's what I like to see. And that's why I want to see it, because the idea wasn't bad. It's not a bad idea. The things that got latched on to it made it bad. And the cops are nice, but I also like to see people express their freedom of speech and stuff. And you guys did, like I said, you guys saw no color. Every time I heard them, I definitely heard medic, and you seen them guys. They was. I'm like, damn. So a lot of good things did come out of CHOP. It made, if nobody ever talked about race before in Seattle, the conversation is happening now, right? So, and if nobody wants to be friends with a black person, people are intrigued about what's going on and stuff. So the message was, it was caught, you know, the people are talking about it. So it's not lost by the wayside, but people are talking about it. Like it just need a spearhead, need to be spearheaded the right way. So.
Right. And now for you guys, you're still, you know, so it's not Tharp or Danielle, but I mean, as long as we're over here, we get a text every night that says, "Hey, this is where medical staff is tonight." If you like, every single night we get a text message, and you know the medics are still around and they're still providing services and still out there. What does that kind of mean to you guys to, like, you know, to still be part? Because you guys would know best, but a lot of the medics say that is their protest. It's like, I'm protesting through being here to provide medical service.
I think for me, that is a direct way that I can support the protest, and I think that is my protest, and that's, I think, a similar sentiment to a lot of the people in our collective. And now there's no more CHOP, but you'll still see us in the trucks behind the marches and being close by. We always let Omari know where we're at. And yeah, I think, you know, what do you have to say?
I mean, it's about the same for me. Especially as a white man in this community, my role is not to be an open and public-facing voice. Instead, I think if I can provide some sort of safety to the platform that is amplifying those voices in our community, then I'm doing the best part I can.
Fantastic. Ashley, so you've seen a cross section here of guests this evening, and what we wanted to do is bring you all kinds of different ways. You know, we have a resident here who was basically for the idea of, you know what I'm saying, of protest, but we're fed up.
Yeah, not in my neighborhood. Not at someone
You
else.
had the medics here who,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, saw trauma but also traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
You have Joey, who's a streamer,
Yeah.
lives in the neighborhood. It talks about what he went through. You had Tamika, who was already suffering from PTSD and was triggered. And I just thought that, it's kind of the Converge way to give people a cross section of all kinds of different things here. But when you look in this neighborhood, one thing that we talk about over here, at least that we literally see, is that some of everybody has been impacted.
Yeah, everybody, every single person has been impacted either directly or vicariously on some level. And what we've seen here was just a cluster of stories, a cluster of symptoms from trauma, racial trauma, PTSD, a whole host of elements, and even grief. That's one that we haven't really talked about. We were already grieving the loss of our everyday normals from COVID. And now CHOP is gone, so there's individuals who are grieving the loss of CHOP. What does that look like for them? What does it look like for the ways that they showed up? Even for you all as medics, that was part of your normal routine, which now it's kind of changed, which you're still available and you're out there, but the way that you navigate it is now changing. So we have to adapt. And anytime there's a change or there's a loss, there's a certain aspect of grief that we all experience. And so just recognizing your body and how you're showing up and what level of grief you're in. I know there's different stages, but not everybody gets to those stages of grief and it shows up. Sometimes it looks like anger. We've seen that. I'm gonna have to go back and watch the videos. And it's okay to be angry. I know no one wants to be the angry black woman, the angry black man, but anger is a completely normal emotion. We're human, and it's how we feel. But how do you process your anger is the important part. That's key. How are you processing your grief? How are you processing your trauma, those outlets, so that it doesn't take a huge toll and impact your day to day? Because that's what I look at as a clinician when I'm actually diagnosing. How is this impacting your normal functioning? And a lot of us are high functioning. And some of us were high functioning, and then we had COVID, then we had the protests, then we had racial trauma exacerbated. So what was high functioning is now barreling over into something else. And so it's really recognizing that. And sometimes it's not even us. Maybe it's our friends or our peers who can tap in and let us know in a nice, healthy way, like, hey, I'm seeing some changes. Maybe you should talk to somebody, or just sharing what they do in their own life, what I said in the first segment. But again, I love that you brought a huge array of voices who were all a part of the movement, directly, indirectly. Myself, I was tapping in on your feed because I was doing sessions, so I couldn't get out there. I was helping the community in a different way who were already experiencing PTSD and racial trauma, so I couldn't be on the front lines. So yeah.
Right. Wow. So we went long today, but we didn't want to. In the morning show, I'm always cutting somebody off. You know what I'm saying? Or even on the stream, I'm like, look, bro, okay, you're talking way too long. But we wanted to be able to let everybody talk. And today was just a first step, in the discussion and sharing these stories. And I want to thank all the guests, for being so open, especially in a public forum like this. I want to thank Ashley Mcgirt, MSW. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you for having me. Always.
My favorite therapist. And most importantly, look, I want to thank our crew today, because these guys put this whole thing together in less than a day. I mean, we talked about it. It was like, man, we need to be able to try to put a show together. And you people see, there's a different set for us today. It's a lot of different equipment and setup. So I want to thank Nikki. I got to thank Bobby Stills, the big boss. All ya, you know what I'm saying? Nothing moves without her. Jake's over here. Eric Calligraphy. Want to thank John. I think Onika was back there. You know what I'm saying? And everybody who's here. Programming note: we're back tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for the morning update show. On behalf of all of our guests, Ashley Mcgirt, thank you so much for joining us. This has been Community Voices, the Mental Health Edition. Peace.